East Policy, which is a pro-Israel think tank. I have that available if anyone's interested. It's a tremendous speech. All the rabbis, we all kept in touch, and we all observed, we talked among ourselves, and we waited and waited for the announcement of a second meeting. But you know what happened? The BP oil disaster and a host of other things were going on, and we hadn't heard, and we were starting to think that there wasn't going to be a second meeting. So one of the rabbis emailed Jack and said, if that's his understanding too, could we begin talking about our meeting, since it looks like it's a one and done? But then on May 6th, we got a call from the White House for a follow-up meeting on May 13th. So again, we met for a pre-briefing that morning. And again, we met with the same players, Ross and Cher and Emanuel and Boren, except added to the mix now was Dan Shapiro. Dan Shapiro was is a member of the National Security Council. He's also the top Middle East expert for the administration. He said to us, just like the first one, Ambassador Ross opened the meeting for us. And he said to us that he hopes that we have seen the manifestations of the change. He made it a point to emphasize that regarding defense, intelligence, and security, the relationship between Israel and America have never been stronger. He quoted Israel's defense minister, Ehud Barak, after his 6th visit to Washington, and declared that the relationship between the two allies is as strong as with any other administration. Ross emphasized that regarding Israel's defense, the United States meets weekly with her ally Israel, and we should have received information expressing that, and we did. Dan Shapiro introduced himself and talked about the intelligence cooperation that the two countries share. And then he dropped a bombshell. The administration was announcing that afternoon that a $205 million appropriation for an Iron Dome missile defense system on top of the $3 billion in aid Israel already receives. This joint defense project, Israel pays half, will deter incoming missiles, and is part of the administration's understanding that there can be no negotiations or solutions without an effective missile defense system for the Jewish state. This country, he said, is committed to a secure and safe Israel. Then Rahm Emanuel added that in his view there has never been more cooperation between Israel and America when it comes to security. He also emphasized that it was this administration that successfully completed what the Bush administration, to their credit, started and campaigned hard for, namely Israel's acceptance into the OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. It's an elite group of 31 nations committed to democracy and the market economy. Admission has been a dream of Israel's and its long-fought battle for acceptance in the world theater. Like last time, after hearing them speak, we had a good chunk of time to express our thoughts. And while we respectfully acknowledged the good that the administration was doing, we emphasized where we in our community felt that they were not being helpful. We asked about news that we were hearing just that week that the administration is pushing for the UN Nuclear-Free Middle East Summit, something that will single out and put pressure on Israel to give up its often denied but always assumed nuclear program. They responded by saying that since 1995, this has been something that has been pushed by this country and accepted by Israel. They promised us that such a program, which is scheduled for 2012, will not be a summit that singles out Israel or hurts her deterrence capability in any way. To quote one of the members there, we understand Israel's full layer of deterrence. We raised questions regarding the proximity talks. In theory, proximity talks can be helpful because they avoid direct conflict between the two sides early and keep the talking going until we can ultimately get to face-to-face direct negotiations, which is what we need. But proximity talks, we said, put enormous pressure on the third party, which is America. And we're in the middle of any disputes that arise. And we asked, what will happen when there are difficulties, and the United States is going to have to be the arbiter. We don't want a replay of the tension in March, which created the problem that brought us here. We're happy to be here, but we'd like to avoid that again. We also raised the question of sanctions on Iran, and how long are we going to go down the path before we say sanctions are simply a dead end? They don't seem to be having any traction, they don't have any teeth, and the international community is simply not united behind us. How long do we wait, and what is your next step? Now, on that issue, Emanuel said that we cannot isolate Iran by ourselves in a meaningful way to affect the Iranian economy and force a change. That's why we need to get the international community to work with us. If we move too quickly, unilaterally, and pass our own sanctions through Congress, this lets the rest of the countries off the hook. So we are working on this the proper way, he said, getting the international community on board, and we cannot operate on a timeline. Now, I and others raised the issue that the president himself needs to be a little bit more fully engaged and show both Israelis and the members of the pro-Israel community that he gets it. That we need to see a president that shows that, like previous presidents we've had, Israel is a friend, a personal friend to the president. This outreach that they were doing, we said, is good, but things won't ever change until the President of the United States does the outreach. And we are not seeing that vis-a-vis Israel. He needs to talk directly to the Israelis. I said, to use a baseball analogy, Ted will like this, to use a baseball analogy, from successfully getting Israel invited to joining the OECD, to the Iron Dome missile defense system, to the speeches that we've been receiving coming from the administration, the White House is starting to put runners on the bases in their attempt to change the negative messaging that is clearly out there. But the problem is the team RBI leader is in the dugout. The president is the only one who could drive them in, and he needs to visit Jerusalem and do it soon, and do what he did in Cairo in 2009, and that is speak to the hearts and souls of the Israelis and show them that he understands their fears. Until then, the runners will be left on base, stranded, like New York Met players. That's a joke, okay? The answer I and others got was simply that the president will find his opportunities to make his feelings known in time. And that was it. Now, there was more, but as if to emphasize the point that we should not worry about where the president stands on Israel, Rahm Emanuel, Dennis Ross, and Dan Shapiro, as Jews and supporters of Israel, made a very important statement. They emphasized to us, and I thought this was very important, that they would not be in this administration if they felt for 1 minute that Obama's priorities were not in the right place. And then finally, before Emanuel left, he reiterated to us that there are three things that are key to U.S. foreign policy. 1, isolate Iran from the international community, which will force them to end their nuclear program. 2, remove America's footprint in Iraq. And 3, the need to work on the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Now, as I said when I began, there was a lot more, but these were, at least in my view, the major issues discussed. The conversations were extremely civil and courteous. They were tense at times, as questions were not always answered the way we thought they should be answered, or answered to the satisfaction of everyone. And there were follow-ups and interruptions. I haven't added this simply because those who felt the answers were satisfied didn't need the follow-up, and those who had issues, I'm sorry to say, with an answer, I don't think they got much more beyond the first answer. So I walked away with 4 conclusions, and I want to touch upon these 4 conclusions very briefly before I open it up to you for your questions and also your comments about the American-Israel relationship. Now remember, these are only my conclusions, so listen carefully, and if you don't like them, just toss them away. Number 1, The American-Israel relationship is a complex one. By that I mean we are allies and we are close friends, but we will see things differently from time to time. And I don't know if the administration is seeing the Middle East the same way as most Israelis are right now. Doesn't mean we're not allies, but we have a different perspective, and therefore the two countries will approach a particular issue differently. In addition, since we're both democratic countries with governments that swing center-left or center-right, depending on the elections, the relationship will become complicated and feel different at times, depending on who's in office. I mean, keep in mind and ask yourself, would relations feel closer if center-left Tzipi Livni of the Kadima Party or Ehud Barak of the Labor Party were in power in Israel? Possibly. Would a McCain-Netanyahu relationship work better? Probably. To put another way, tensions can develop when one government is more conservative or more liberal than the other, and I think we might be experiencing that here. That doesn't mean that there are not major agreements between our countries, because when it comes to the core issues, security, Iran, the peace process, there are common principles. However, the focus of the different governments and the urgencies each government feels are probably going to be different. And that's when your tensions are going to rise and will continue to arise. Number two, the administration is a pro-Israel administration. They love Israel and are committed to her safety and security. As one of the rabbis said who did not walk away particularly happy with the Obama administration even after the second meeting, he said, they may have different ideas on how to apply the love or achieve that safety, but I think it's a mistake to dismiss them as anti-Israel. He said, to put it differently, they believe very similar things to Tzipi Livni or Shimon Peres of Israel. And you can disagree vehemently and passionately with their approaches, but you wouldn't challenge Livni's or Peres's love of Israel. And you shouldn't do that here. And I think that can't be overstated. Number three, if you're an Obama supporter and you're part of the pro-Israel community, you really need to have a gut check at the halfway point. Be honest and ask yourself, does this administration really have a full grasp of the difficult issues ahead? Do they really have a full and broad range of foreign policy ideas and plans that show that they understand the complexities and the dangers that are looming? Do they have a plan B if and when sanctions don't work? It's becoming apparent that we are running out of time and sanctions are not being implemented, let alone working. And how will these proximity talks ever lead to direct negotiations when either side can easily find provocation? And how will this administration become the arbiter effectively in the next dispute? What has changed? Psychology. What has changed in the psychology of either that makes the administration feel comfortable that this path of engagement will lead to anything but tension? As they told us when we first began on April 20th, the first direct talks back in the 90s led to the Intifada and suicide bombers. The unilateral disengagement from Gaza and Lebanon led to Hamas and Hezbollah firing rockets. What's changed? These are serious questions that should be asked, and should be asked if you're an Obama supporter, if the administration really grasps the difficulty and has the answers for what lies ahead. And finally, number four, if you're a critic of the administration, one cannot conveniently ignore or pretend that the defensive tools and security operations that we heard and you're hearing, and if you took the time to read, you'll see, is phony. You might say they're not enough, and that the administration's attempt to engage, no matter what, is disastrous and misguided foreign policy. But to hear sentiments that this White House hates Israel or is anti-Semitic is not only false, but undermines your credibility. I end by saying that I was honored and I was privileged to be asked to be part of this event and to be with the extraordinary men and women I was asked to join. I didn't go on April 20th to unmask the administration as frauds or to work for their re-election. And I hope you listened, and I worked real hard to thread this needle. I hope you listened and feel that I took my role seriously, namely, to be a listening post for you and myself, to share with the administration as a sounding board my feelings and the feelings I am hearing from my community, and then be honest and share with you what I think the administration is getting right and what I think the administration needs to work on. And I was incredibly honored to represent Charleston, West Virginia, and to play a role in the American-Israel friendship. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, this could either be fun or very uncomfortable here. I have a half an hour. I said it from 6 to 7:30. I wanted to design this. We have enough time. Let me hear from you now. And I ask this of you, and if I get people upset, I'm sorry. But I want this to be a respectful conversation. And if it's a question, I'll try to answer. If you just want to vent and comment, fine. Just my only thing is please keep it as brief as humanly possible so other people can comment as well. 2 more caveats. I will call foul and ask you to be seated if you bring up the deficit, health care, Rand Paul, Tea Party, BP, or Massey Coal, okay? There's probably some other things along the way. Did I mention health care? Okay, health care too. We are not here to debate economics or environmental policy. We're here to talk openly as a community, as friends, about the American-Israel relationship. Finally, I will also ask you, I will maybe not politely ask you to go back to your seat, if you call Obama critics racists, or if you call Obama a secret Muslim or a Manchurian candidate, okay? We don't need that tonight. You can send me an email saying that, but not tonight. Everyone is entitled to speak, and everyone has an opinion, and it's a valid opinion. Let everyone speak, but at the same time, be respectful when you have a chance to speak. Remember, we are in a synagogue, and we should act as honorable and decent people to each other. Okay, so with that, here's the mic. Come forward. A question or a comment? Over here. You have to go over there. Them's the rules. Be helpful to me. No, we want to make sure, that way I don't have to repeat the question, or if I did, I can hear it. So come over here, if you don't mind.
Did you get an impression, Rabbi, as to what the administration would do if the sanctions which they are going to propose don't work, and whether or not they would accept Iran as a nuclear nation and live with it?
To be honest with you, no, I did not. That's why I put one of my conclusions. You have to ask yourself. That's a serious question. I don't know if there's a good answer out there, but that was a serious question. In my transcript, I was very careful about that. I did not have an answer after that question that we raised because I didn't feel there was an answer. It was almost like it was skipped. So that was a good question.
I have 2 questions. One, your opinion on the flotilla, Turkey-sponsored flotilla, and how that's going to impact everything. And the other thing, to bounce off that question a little bit, if Israel decides to attack Iran, if it gets to that point, what's the administration's response might be, or your feeling on it?
To the answer to the second one, we did not get a feeling. That was one of the things that the rabbis talked about afterwards. What happens if the sanctions don't work? What were we hearing? And we weren't hearing anything. Were they going to ask Israel to do it? Were they say, Israel, you better not do it? Were they going to unilaterally take a stand? We found out, I thought, more in terms of what Israel and the United States were thinking last week when Dr. Jonathan Edelman spoke from the University of Denver. I thought he kind of presented a lot of possibilities, but again, he's not an insider. It would have been nice to hear from the administration if there was, and as you see, we do keep secrets. I would say, yes, they have a plan, don't worry, but we didn't hear anything to that effect. Now, with regard to the flotilla, obviously it complicates matters. And on one hand, it shows the urgency of needing to try to find some type of solution. Israel, and that's what Joe Biden said last night in front of an interview with Charlie Rose, Israel has a right to defend itself and make sure that weapons are not coming in. At the same time, there is a feeling internationally and among many Israelis that this blockade is untenable. It's very difficult. It's bad PR, but it's also a bad humanitarian sign. And Israel has tried as hard as it can to try to get the humanitarian aid through Ashdod. Ashdod or Ashkelon? Ashdod, I think. But there's been resistance both with Hamas. There's been problems like this. I mean, Israel realizes there's human beings there that they're trying to help. This just further complicates the situation. It puts America in a real test. How are they going to go? Are they going to be supporting Turkey? Because Turkey is putting pressure on the United States. And Israel is saying, wait a second, you're saying that this is a changed administration. We're concerned about you. What are you going to do? I did receive something this afternoon from one of the rabbis who said it would have been preferable if the United Nations and Obama administration had blocked any action implying criticism of Israel for defending itself. Nonetheless, you could argue that intervention by the United States prevented passage of a far harsher Security Council condemning Israel. It did talk, it's the only country that did say Israel has a right to defend itself. Hillary Clinton said that, and so did Joe Biden. But that's the best I can do with those. But those are great questions.
It seems like the biggest breakup between American Jews and Obama has to do with the concept of settlements, of course, of building in East Jerusalem. And of course, the Israelis say, we can build there. It's part of our country. And Obama said they've got to stop that before they begin any negotiations, when clearly that should be something that is negotiated. And that seemed to be where the breakup began. Did they address that?
We did raise that question. What Dennis Ross spoke to us, he said, it has been the policy of every administration since 1967 that the settlements are an obstacle to peace, that we've got to get the two sides together. Any settlement between the Palestinians and the Israelis will amount to a Palestinian state. The settlements create an impossible ability for that to happen. And those are provocations in their mind. They're not the obstacle, but they are a significant obstacle to the peace. Okay? They also said, and they said that that's very important, Benjamin Netanyahu, and to his credit, had a 10-month freeze on all settlement activity other than in Jerusalem on the West Bank, to which Hillary Clinton acknowledged that was an astonishing step forward by the Israeli administration. So I don't know if, did that answer your question? They're saying it is a problem. It is an issue. It's not the only issue, but it is an issue.
But did the rabbis criticize the administration for that at all, for having a precondition to begin talking?
Well, they're not arguing that's a precondition. They're saying that's always been our policy. I mean, again, I'm not trying to say they're right. I'm saying this is the administration's viewpoint. It has always been American policy that settlements are a problem. We need to get those distractions, those sideshows, as Dennis Ross said, off the camera. So by saying that there are no settlements, we can get the Palestinians to feel they're going to be met with good faith. They need to get on the Palestinian side a rejection of terrorism, to stop textbooks creating incitement, to not name streets after terrorists. That's the things that they can do to remove the sideshows. And the settlements are... One rabbi argued, he's an Orthodox rabbi down in Boca Raton, he made probably the most eloquent arguments about the settlements. But as again, this is what was going on. The administration was saying settlements have always been, in the eyes of the American administrations, since the beginning, an obstacle to peace. We have not changed our policy about that. Okay?
Since when are the Israelis not allowed to build where they want to?
This is where, remember the back and forth I was telling you that got us nowhere? I'm going to try to pair it with the administration is saying. They're not trying to make judgment calls. They are trying to create the process of peace. Settlements are an obstacle to get the Palestinians to the table. Acts of terror and violence, incitement, are obstacles that will refuse to get the Israelis to the table. Okay? They're not saying it's a settlement. They're saying those are obstacles to even start the proximity talks. Do you realize, I mean, and the point is well taken. I will tell you one thing that you're saying. Regardless of settlements in Jerusalem, we are so far behind right now. We are in proximity talks. I didn't explain what proximity talks, but just in case you don't know, that means that George Mitchell has worked a whole year, okay, to get the opportunity to speak to Abbas in Ramallah for a few days, and then go to Jerusalem and speak to Netanyahu for a few days, then have a week to think about all the things that are being said at each other but not to each other, and then go back to Ramallah, talk a little bit more, then go back a few days later to Israel. They're not even in the same city, let alone the same building. That's how far back they've fallen. And we've got to change that, because the question raised about the flotilla, we've got to try to change what's going on here.
I find the experience that you had a little disconcerting. In other words, the White House summons a small cross-section of the Jewish community from across the country, 12, 15 rabbis. The message that they give you is that they are very good friends of Israel. They tell you they are very keenly aware of how the media portrays the relationship between America and Israel, and therefore they are very well aware that the perception out here is that there's a deterioration of the relationship, which is very clear to anyone who reads the Gazette. Although the Gazette, of course, is not a good example of the media. But nevertheless, if that is the case, why this effort to tell a small group that they are very good friends, and yet there's nothing coming out in the rest of the efforts that they make to show the world that they really do that they do have a relationship that is truly a friendly one? Why is this happening?
What would you want them to do?
Are you asking me?
I mean, I'm asking because I understand, and if it was, everybody has, and Jack Moline told us, everyone has an agenda. They have an agenda, you have an agenda. This is really cool. I can't wait to tell my congregants I went to the White House. Everyone has an agenda. What was their agenda? Obviously, I think it was, A, to try to get the pulse of the community, okay? If it was a PR stunt, that one doesn't hold much water because, again, afterwards there was no parade of rabbis, there was no big photo ops, there was nothing in the New York Times or Washington Post, look how great the administration is, here's 15 rabbis, all think he's doing a great job. And by the way, I tried to do this as balanced as I could. I've seen some of my colleagues, and they have a very sobering view of the administration. So if they think they did this to help, I don't know if it did. I've tried as best as I can to both communicate what they said and what we argued and what we said in our concerns. I'm not sure if I'm changing anyone's minds. I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to be the messenger and tell you this is what we experience. Was it a good effort? I don't know. That's a good question. Well, and Doctor, you're right. Doctor's point is, if it's a good message, give it to the whole world. If you remember in my speech, if you weren't falling asleep, it's because it's rather long. One of the things we said, and I've said, and I got into an argument with Dennis Ross, and it wasn't a huge argument. My God, I adore this guy. I was shocked. I was saying, oh my God, I interrupted the ambassador. But the importance of President Obama being a major player and being out there is missing. I mean, we were hearing it from Rahm Emanuel. We were hearing it from Dennis Ross. We're not hearing it from the president. We're not, I think Jack Moline said, convince us that President Obama loves Israel or has feelings for Israel in his kishkas. And he asked us after the two meetings, did you get that sense that he really appreciates it? There's a poll in Israel. I don't know if you know the polls about Israel. There's two ways to look at the polls in Israel about Obama. One poll has his popularity at 5%. Did you hear that one? Okay. There's another poll. The other poll has his popularity at 59%. Okay. It's Haaretz. It's a left-wing leaning paper, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But they made a very interesting point. Of the 59% that like Obama, 51% said, if I'm not mistaken, they called him an Inyani in Hebrew. An Inyani in Hebrew means matter of fact, businesslike. And that's the perception that the Israelis have about Obama. It's not that they don't think he's a nice guy. It's not that they don't think he likes Israel, because America likes Israel, but he treats this as just an issue and he flies above it. And they're kind of spoiled because the past two administrations, you had very, very strong, caring presidents, Republican and Democrat, that had a very strong relationship with the prime ministers, no matter who it was. And now we have a president that seems to be rather aloof. That's why we kept emphasizing, this is all well and good. These are nice things. I'm enjoying it. But until you bring Obama, and he doesn't have to come in here to the Roosevelt Room and shake our hand, he needs to plan a trip to Israel and speak in Jerusalem before the Knesset and go out there and indicate that what he feels about Israel. And I think he would do a lot. And one of the things I said was, you know, we're worrying about changing public opinion of American Jews in America. You want to change the perception of American Jews, change Israeli Jews' opinion of Obama. You do that, you'll change American Jews. Oh, okay. I didn't want to clap, but thank you.
We always seem to, when we have a strong Jewish center within the leadership, going back to Kissinger, that the expectation is that Israel will be the one to make the accommodations. We want to be, they want to lean over backwards to be fair to the Arabs, so the Israelis should make the accommodations. And that I find, you know, why isn't it, why aren't the Arabs making the accommodations? Israel won the war.
I would argue, I don't know if it's so much putting pressure. Dennis Ross said, you know, we have not asked Israel to make a single concession. We haven't asked them to give up and concede 1 inch of land. Think about it. And this is what he said. I mean, I thought he made a good point. He said, President Bill Clinton asked Israel to give up almost 95% of the West Bank and share Jerusalem, and his popularity is 95%. Okay? So it's not the concessions, it's the feeling that you have somebody guarding your back. If you feel that you can trust an administration, that America is actually going to watch it, then Israel will be prepared to make those sacrifices that are needed for peace, at least in, you know, if you believe in the idea of land for peace. If you don't, then forget that, what I just said. But the administration is committed to engaging the Middle East and wants to create a solution. They're not feeling they're putting pressure just on Israel. They believe that that pressure has to be applied equally. Are they doing it? That's a valid question. That's a good question. Alan, do you want?
It seems to me that there is a big distinction between what Obama does and what Obama is saying. And I am a very strong Obama supporter. But Obama has a Muslim last name, and that presents for us a wonderful opportunity for him to use that name and his color to achieve peace with the people who wouldn't otherwise trust him. So maybe the reason that he's not, I'm just guessing, but maybe the reason that he's not appearing in Israel, cozying up too publicly,